Let me see. The way this is going to work is I'll answer some questions for a while, and then we'll stop and sing, and then I'll answer a few more questions. I'm wondering, could somebody be a timekeeper for me? I'm looking at you, dear. Could you get your phone out? Set it for 7 minutes. Okay. 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 Let's start with an easy one. Is it widely known that we do a video recording of most sermons and post them on YouTube? Is it widely known? This, you guys are going to have to... Okay, so we do a video recording of most sermons and we post them on YouTube, and to find the recordings, just go to YouTube and search for UUCP Moscow. UUCP Moscow. So if you're ever not able to be here. All right, what are the similarities and differences between religious, as it pertains to Unitarian Universalists, and a non-political socialist? So for me, religious, I go back to the roots of the word, and religion comes from ligare, which is Latin, it's the same root word as ligament, right? It means to connect. So the difference between non-political socialism, which is sort of a philosophy, an economic philosophy, and religious, I think what we're looking for here, what we're searching for, and what we're trying to cultivate is the ability to transcend, to connect with something that is larger than ourselves. That's with one another, with the sense of community, with life itself, with something that some people may choose to call God, but there's a sense of connection to the interdependent web, I think, that isn't necessarily there in secular socialism. Okay, let's see. Does faithful religious practice eventually lead to true religious conviction of a selfless sort? I think that so for me, I want to differentiate first between spiritual practice and religious practice. Spiritual practice is something we can do on our own, and religious practice is something that we do in community. And so the answer to the question then is yes, because I think what happens when we come together in community is we create webs of mutuality and accountability. So in these relationships with our community, with one another, we're invited into becoming better and more selfless and more productive humans. I think that's part of the work that we do here. So there's that one. Okay. How do you help others cleanly without attitude, expectations, or resentments? Okay, I don't know why I picked this one up with this group, but we'll figure it out. Okay, it feels good to help people, I think, and it's actually related to some others that I may pick up on how to say no and how to choose and what to do and what not to do. So hold on. Here we go. What are your best strategies for self-care while also trying to meet all of the demands of your community and congregation? How do you say no? So for me, I really, one of my mantras is the Buchner quote, that the place the world calls you to is the place where your deep joy and the world's deep hunger meet. And so I try very hard to pay attention to what calls me. Not because the work that calls me and fills me with joy is not, it doesn't come from that selfish sort of self-gratification place. It comes from a deeper place of this is what I'm meant to do and this is what will feed my spirit. And so then you're helping but you're helping I'm helping for my own sake. I'm helping because giving is who I am, being compassionate is who I am, being generous is who I am. So it's a fuller expression of my true self. So, best strategies for self-care. The only thing I'll add to that one is I block out my self-care time on my calendar at the beginning of the week, and then I fit everything else in around it. Because otherwise it gets squeezed out and I don't do it, and then I get sick and cranky and I can't function. Okay. What exactly are we Unitarian Universalists worshiping? Can't we just be celebrating? So for me, I go back again to the origins of the word worship, which is to shape worth, to name that which has worth. And there are things that have worth that we pay attention to that aren't necessarily worth celebrating. Last week is a good example. We talked about racism and white supremacy, and that's uncomfortable, and we're not going to celebrate that. But we're going to lift it up as worth shaping our lives with, as using it as a tool to shape our lives. And so I really value the word worshiping. But I don't, what we're worshiping is the process of shaping a life of meaning. We're not worshiping a deity, we're not worshiping a thing or a person. What we are doing is we're using worship as a tool to create better, happier lives. Okay. All right. There are some that are kind of connected here. How do you reconcile the concept of the inherent worth and dignity of every person with the egregiously horrible acts some people commit, particularly against the most helpless and innocent, such as infants? Do you think some people are evil and some people are good? What is your view on radical inclusion versus limits on tolerance? And then there's a long one. We humans have a deep capacity for kindness, compassion, love, and nurturance. We also have the capacity to behave in the opposite manner. We can see which wolf is leading our current paradigms. I'm seeking the tipping point, the energy that will initiate a movement toward our capacity to feed the loving wolf. Do you have a sense of what that tipping point might be? So, the question of evil is a really tricky one in Unitarian Universalism. There are some of my colleagues who really would argue that we're missing, and it's a big lack, a theology of sin, repentance, and redemption. So how do we come to terms with the fact that evil exists? It's part of our world, and honestly, it's part of each of us. I mean, there's the Solzhenitsyn quote about, how easy would it be if the dividing line between good and, if some people were good and some people were evil, but the dividing line between good and evil runs down the center of every human heart. So I think that's the place to start, is none of us are wholly good, none of us are wholly evil. All of us are trying to shift that line in our own heart. And also, I think all of us are capable of shifting the line in other people's hearts. I have seen miracles happen in relationship. People are inherently compassionate and empathetic, and I think when we listen to each other's stories, when we're able to sit and connect heart to heart, those lines in our hearts, they move. And so sometimes I've talked about ministry. My job as a minister is to create gracious space where people can be transformed by their relationships with the holy and with one another. And it's that transformation process that I think, I want to feed all of my energy into. And at the same time, you can't deny that there are people who do quite a lot of harm. And how do we, when we don't believe in hell, when we're universalists and we don't believe in hell, what do you do with Hitler? What do you do with people who abuse and harm innocents? I don't know. I'm still trying to figure it out. I think the story I keep thinking about whenever I come back to this topic is, I had a friend who was in Vietnam, and he was imprisoned for 14 years. And when he describes the context of his imprisonment, he's in a place where the ceiling is too short for him to sit or even stand. And so he's forced to lie down. There's just a little window at the end. He gets a little bit of water and then the ends of food that you wouldn't even feed a pig every day. So really, pretty miserable conditions. I don't think it was that bad for the whole 14 years, but it was that bad for a time. And he talks about going through this process of course, being angry and being despairing, and and then the way he defines it is the Spirit of Jesus came to him. And what happened then is when his captors came to let him out of his cell, he would smile at them, which of course made them mad, and so they beat him up. And they said, "Why are you smiling? Why are you smiling?" And he just kept smiling. And then finally he answered, he said, I've been in this cell by myself, and I don't have my glasses, so I can't really see all that well. But I see that there's a shape and there's a human being. And wow, I'm a human being too. And that person has eyes and a heart, and wow, I have eyes and a heart too. And so I'm filled with love for that person who's coming to get me. And when the prison guards heard that, next thing you know, they're giving him back his glasses. And they're moving him to a better cell, and they're giving him better food. And there's a way in which I think the only way to respond to evil in ourselves and in others is acceptance and love, because that's what opens the path to transformation. And that's hard. That's really hard to live with sometimes. Okay. Did I get all of this? View on radical inclusion versus limits on tolerance. I guess I'll just add to that too, that as far as the community goes, we're committed to radical inclusion, and our tolerance, yes?
With the inclusion of self-care, but if you're in a dangerous situation, you should not love.
Right, yeah, no, for sure. Love of self has to come first before love of others comes, absolutely. I'm not into redemptive suffering for sure, and nobody should stay in an abusive situation. And I think as far as the community goes, the limits of our radical inclusivity are drawn by covenant. So when there is a person who's engaging in behavior that is damaging to the community, we covenant with that person in ways that prevent harm from being done. And so in our community, that's what we use to balance that value of radical inclusion and a need for safety for all, safety and health in the community as a whole. We good? Let's do some light ones. What's your favorite activity in the church? Singing. Are you a dog or a cat person? Both. What brings you the most joy in your life? Oh, gosh, I have to pick. I think what I want to say is anytime I'm fully in the present with what I'm doing, whether it's being with my family or singing or being out in the woods, when I'm able to just really be present and open my heart, swimming, joy just floods me all the time. So, what's your best guilty pleasure? Chocolate. What's your favorite childhood memory? And again, there are so many. But I think the one I'll share today is the first hike that I took with my dad. I think I was about 5 years old, and it was the first big girl hike. And we drove to Mount Chocorua. All right, got it. And what I remember is the care with which every time I fell, he picked me up and dusted me off and kissed my boo-boos. And, you know, he carried the big backpack with all of the snacks and the water. And it was beautiful. And I made it all the way to the top by myself, and I made it all the way down, and I only fell like 5 times, and I was so proud of myself. And then we went for root beer floats afterwards. So, yeah. So, do you want me to keep going? Okay. Okay, here's another quick one. This is from Julius, so I will find him during. Okay, there's one. All right. Have you done the Bloody Mary challenge? No, I have no idea what that is. Knock, knock, who's there? Pigpen. Pigeon. Pigeon who? Pigeon your cheek? That's from Gwen. Nice one. Pigeon your cheek. Okay. That's awesome. She made up a joke. All right. How in the spirit of the first UU principle do we live as a community with members of a religious community? All right, so these are the political ones. How in the spirit of the first UU principle do we live as a community with members of a religious community in this area with whose leaders' belief we profoundly disagree? Do we support their establishing a music conservatory? Do we refuse to patronize members' businesses and thus perhaps deny them an opportunity to make a living? So that's obviously talking about Christ Church and Doug Wilson. And I think we each have to follow our own conscience there. You know, how do you tolerate intolerance? You know, what do you, I think for me, I'm more interested in pursuing positive outcomes than I am in trying to prevent negative outcomes. So, you know, I think I would rather personally, you all do whatever you want, but personally, I'd rather respond to the establishment of a music conservatory by having more concerts. And I'd rather, you know, work on community development and supporting the local business. You know, for me, it's not about choosing not to go to some businesses. It's about choosing to support the businesses of people who are who I consider valued members of my community. You know, the people who show up at Pride Festival and the people who show up and offer free food, you know, those are the places that I'm more likely to patronize. And that said, my family loves Humble Burger, and if I told them we couldn't go there anymore, I'd be in a lot of trouble. So, okay, do you agree or disagree with Trump's latest executive order that ministers can promote political opinions from the pulpit? Why or why not? And what path will I follow personally? And then this one too says, do you support repeal of the Johnson Act, allowing ministers to support political issues and candidates without losing nonprofit status? You know, this isn't one that I get my panties in a wad over, to be honest with you. Maybe I should, but we ministers have been wiggling our way around this by focusing on issues rather than candidates, and as things become more and more polarized, it's just really obvious that that's what's going on, you know, and I think it's appropriate. I think as people of faith, we have a responsibility to be public with our values. And I still don't think our values are tied to any one particular political party. I know plenty of people who vote all kinds of different ways, who support our values of inclusion and compassion and acceptance. but anyway, maybe I'll just leave it there. Representative Labrador stated that there's no mention of separation of church and state in the Constitution, so it's not a founding principle. Has he read the Constitution? Okay. And nobody's been harmed by not having access to health care either. WTF. All right, that's my answer. What's the appropriate level of political discourse during the service? Oh, I think I just crossed it. Okay. What's the purpose of Alzheimer's disease? And do you have some words or of faith or wisdom when bad things happen to seemingly good people? I don't think bad things happen for a reason. I don't think Alzheimer's disease or any of the other forms of suffering that we move through here while on earth in our bodies have any outstanding reason. I don't think things happen for a reason. I don't think there's a purpose. I think things just are, you know. Alzheimer's, you know, why some brains move in that, you know, get the gray stuff. I don't know. I don't think there's a reason. But I do think that, well, no, I don't think. I know that for people who love folks with Alzheimer's, I know it's an incredibly hard road. An incredibly hard road to love somebody with Alzheimer's at the end of their life, because you're watching them slip away, you know, moment by moment for a period of years. I mean, it's just brutal. It's just brutal. And I also know that over time we find gifts in it, you know. Sometimes the gifts are really small and puny compared to the suffering, but, you know, it goes back to the time when I thought that one of my kids might have cancer. And I had this huge aha moment where I realized that no matter how hard losing him would be, loving him was worth it. And so that's really the only thing that I can say to folks who are going through bad times, who have had bad things happen to them, is, you know, love is worth it. And sometimes if we keep breathing, we find gifts. So. Check in again. You want me to keep going? Yeah. Okay. Anyone saying no? If anyone has to go to the bathroom or get up and stretch, feel free. What's red and white and gray all over? Is that like a albino zebra in the blender or something like that? Do you ever doubt your Unitarian Universalist identity or struggle with any of the 7 principles? There actually have been times when I've doubted my Unitarian Universalist identity. I would say when I first started doing ministry, the learning curve was steep. We'll just say that. And I questioned because, you know, I thought, am I in the right place? Am I too spiritual? Am I too theistic? Am I too, you know, would I do better in a church where people actually do what they're told? And so I actually, you know, I had sort of a spiritual moment where I was It was late at night, and I'd had more than a drink or two, and I was on retreat, so I went to the chapel, and I was sort of praying and saying, all right, am I in the right place? Am I doing what I'm supposed to do? And the answer I got was, I grew up Unitarian Universalist, and so I speak UU. And my understanding of the work that I do is bigger than just Unitarian Universalism. I mean, it's actually much bigger than just Unitarian Universalism. I think that my job, the work that I'm a part of, is interfaith and expansive and just huge and complex. This process, I mean, it's really that collective process of evolution, right? That's what I'm trying to serve. Now, why am I serving in this place particularly? And there's two reasons. One is I speak UU fluently because I grew up in a humanist UU fellowship. And so I'm able most of the time, I think, for most people to translate the ideas that drive that collective evolution forward into words that make sense for folks and congregations. Do I struggle with any of the 7 principles? It's that democratic process one. So, there's a YouTube video with a guy trying to take a picture of 15 kittens. And, one kitten gets lined up and the other one's going away. And all right, so sometimes I'm jealous of my Catholic, I was complaining to somebody about the chairs downstairs in the basement. This is before we got the new ones, and saying, oh, those chairs are so uncomfortable. And she said, you're the pastor, can't you just get new ones? And I just started to laugh. Okay. So here we have 3 very related ones. As an open and tolerant congregation, how do we dialogue with those who don't share our values? How can we combat intolerance without becoming intolerant, especially when hate speech is cloaked in religious garb? And these days it's really hard to feel I'm living the first principle. I need help on this. So what helps me with these sorts of things is really having that sense of that process of collective evolution and trying to see the ways in which not everybody has been privileged enough to have the background that I've had, to be exposed to the ideas that I've been exposed to be able to have the relationships that I've had. And so I really do think transformation takes place in relationship, and if we're not in relationship with people who think differently than we are, then we're not going to be pulling that process forward. So I think it's important to listen first. The process there's an article that the Harvard Business School put out that I've been passing around. The process that they lay out really focuses on asking questions, not attacks disguised as questions, which we liberals are really good at, but actual curious questions, and then really listening carefully, finding points of connection, points of agreement, deep values that we share, and then asking permission to share our point of view, a different point of view. That's how I think that needs to work. And again, the caveat is nobody has to listen to something that causes them harm. For me, I feel, because I have a lot of privilege, because I'm a cisgendered, white, educated person in a position that has a certain amount of authority that goes with it, I feel obligated to be engaged in that work of bridging gaps, working with people who have different perspectives and points of view. I think people who are on the margins, people who are in the LGBTQ community, people who are people of color, people who are oppressed, who are, felons, all those folks have the right to be tired, have the right to step away. It's the death of 1,000 cuts, the microaggressions, the constant microaggressions. And, of course they have the right to get tired and to want to pull back from the work, which is why I think it's so important that we keep at it, even though it's hard and even though sometimes it feels like we're not going to get anywhere. I just keep thinking about the larger arc, you know. Things are a lot better now than they were 100 years ago. As a whole people, we understand a lot more than we understood 100 years ago. And what's more, you know, the other thing that gives me hope is the children and the youth. They get it so much better than any of the adults, and eventually the old folks are going to die off and the millennials will take over and things will be better. Okay, one last check-in. I think I'm going to be able to get the last 4 questions in the last, all right. Although there's some really big ones. Do you follow blogs or other regularly written posted writers or thinkers, and what are they? My favorite is the Tara Brach's podcast. My favorite is Tara Brach's podcast. I really get a lot out of that. And then it's a little bit random. I follow a lot of UU bloggers, a lot of my colleagues. Some of them are excellent writers and thinkers. And then I follow a couple of blogs on issues of racism and white supremacy, on LGBTQ issues, that sort of thing, to kind of keep pushing my understanding and trying to get better at being human in a multicultural space. What are your children doing now? My guess is they're sleeping. They're both home. Sam's home from college, and Daniel's still a junior in high school. What can we, the congregation, do to better support you? You know what? I really can't think of anything. You guys do a great job of taking care of me and supporting me. I am so grateful. I can't say it enough. I have the best job in the world, and you are the best congregation in the world. Period. So, who or what is God? And is there a proper perspective or way to pray? And then the other question is, what is God to you? So I'm going to start by saying the definition for God that points the way for me is Henry Nelson Wyman's. The word God is basically a placeholder for that which is worth dedicating your life to. That which is worth dedicating your life to. And so God, to me, is that process of collective evolution, and the end point of which is that thing, I say it all the time, the world where every human being knows themselves blessed and beloved, knows every other human being to be blessed and beloved, and we're able to live in harmony with the natural world, at peace with one another and in the natural world. That's the end point. And so when I say God, that process is what I mean. And I experience it sometimes as an intuitive pull, and sometimes as a presence surrounding and supporting me. And I think, and this goes into is there a proper perspective or way to pray? I think all of our theological ideas, we get to choose the ones that help, right? And I'm not interested in debating whether something is right or wrong, whether something is true or false. What I want to know is, does it help? Does it help you be present and joyful and peaceful? Does it help us get along, move forward as a species and as beings on this earth? And so for me, if it helps and doesn't harm, it's legit. And I'm going to stop there and say, Amen and blessed be.